Every 90 seconds, someone is reported missing. Many return to their families, but for others, something has gone seriously wrong. A young boy cycles to his local shop to buy some sweets, but doesn't return.
Went downstairs, full of smiles, got his bike, and off he went to the shop.
It's a high-risk missing persons case.
So as time went on, it became more distressing because he's an 11-year-old little boy.
What happens in the police investigation that follows?
We were treating it as an abduction.
I was given information that Wesley had been given to this paedophile ring.
What happens to the family at its heart?
Mr. Foley comes in. I went, I found Wesley. And he got on his knees and he held both my hands. He went, we found Wesley.
When missing turns to murder.
Everybody liked Wesley because he was straightforward. But he was a fun-loving child, always happy, always willing to help people.
He was just an older little lad. He didn't see any harm in anybody. He had a bit of a sense of humour and we used to have a good laugh.
Mum Liz, Wesley and his 4-year-old brother Robert live on the same street as Grandad Harry.
My dad and Wesley were very, very close. It was his apple of his eye. Everywhere Grandad went, Wesley went and all.
He was just a great kid.
He's always pulling pranks, but good pranks.
He just liked to play and he had a funny sense of humour.
And you could never tell him off. Could never tell him off.
The day it happened, he was going to school, passing my house. I says, I'll see you after school.
Later that day, Wesley's feeling unwell at school. He's recently been diagnosed with epilepsy.
I went over to collect him and I went, you're all right? I says, Mummy's here. He says, I got that horrible, horrible feeling. I went, what? He says, like a burning sensation. He says, my chest was getting tight. And I brought him home. Lay him on the couch. I said, just get yourself away to sleep. I says, and hopefully you'll be all right shortly. And he went to sleep for about an hour and a half. And then when he woke up, he was right as rain. And he went, Mum, can I have 50 pence? I went, what do you want 50 pence for? Get some sweets for me and Robert when he comes from school. And I went, right you are. I says, hold on. And he was going berserk because I didn't give him a 50 pence piece. I gave him 2 20s and a 10. I went, still makes 50 pence. He went, right, Mum. Went downstairs, full of smiles, got his bike, and off he went to the shop. About 10 minutes later, I'm looking out the bedroom window. Where is he? Because by 3 o'clock we were having to pick Robert up from nursery. And I thought, oh, well, maybe he's went straight from the shop up to the school. So I went into the schoolyard and there was like a few of the mothers hanging around. And he seen Wesley on his bike. He knows Liz. And I went, you haven't? No. So goes down to the shop. Went, Yasmin, I says, he's seen Wesley. Oh yeah, he was in about 20 minutes ago, she says. And he was complaining because he didn't have a 50 pence piece. By the way, she says, I'll give him a 50 pence piece. She says, and I'll give him the sweets for nothing. She says, because he gave us a hand. And I went, what do you mean you gave your hand? She says, he took all the empty boxes and put them around the back for us in the yard.
Mum Liz and brother Robert go back home to check if Wesley's there.
I'm watching the clock, no sign of him. I'm starting to get anxious because obviously he knew what time his medication was. And I thought, well, maybe he has bumped into some of his pals. So by 6 o'clock come, I was starting to panic. If he didn't have his medication for his epilepsy, he could have took a fit any time. And I was petrified in case he had took a fit and he was lying somewhere on the road.
Liz can't sit at home doing nothing.
It was getting 6 o'clock and I went out looking with my friend Sharon, and I was just walking around and all over the place, up and down the streets. Went around everybody's house that Wesley knew. I got a horrible, horrible feeling. And I just kept saying to my friend Sharon, I went, there's something not right, there's something not right. It's not like Wesley doing this. He's always on time for his meds. I says, and it's really, really hurting us. I wonder if somebody's knocked him off his bike.
And then your mind starts running wild. You're looking at every building, every alleyway, you're looking everywhere. You simply believe he's there somewhere, we've just got to find him.
My son had a pink and white bike. Obviously when people went out looking, they were also looking for the pink and white bike.
Hour after hour, you couldn't help thinking something could happen because it wasn't like him.
With him not coming home, I knew there was something wrong. Time was getting on, it was still quite bright. And I phoned the police.
When a missing person report comes in, it goes to the uniformed teams immediately, and a uniformed officer will go out and take a report from the member of the family that's reported that person missing, or friend or whoever.
And a young police officer come down and he went, "What's the problem?" I says, "Well, my son's missing." He went, "He'll just be playing around." He says, "With his pals." I went, "He's not." I said, "I've been to everywhere."
You would have expected someone to have seen him if he'd been around, but nobody had seen him.
I says, "What about if he's lying in a ditch or somewhere?" I says, "Somebody's knocked him off his bike." I'm telling you, there's something not right. And I got out of this young policeman, "Well, I think you're being over-anxious." But by this time, I was frantic.
Kids go missing all the time, but usually they're found very quickly.
Police officers were in and out the house, checking to see if he was in the loft and under me bath, under his bed. And I just used to look at the police officers and just say, "Really?" I went, "Do you not think I would know if my son was around?" I said, "The first thing my son would say is, 'Mum, I want something to eat.'" I knew there was something wrong. I think they just thought, "Oh, it's just a naughty boy, he's just ran away." I couldn't get that over to the police. He wouldn't put me through it, he wouldn't put his granddad through it. We were very, very close.
Psychologically, one of the biggest issues is when someone goes missing, particularly a vulnerable person like a child, it's incumbent on the police to ensure that the home address is searched properly, so you can be confident that person is not in that address. Now that does cause some trauma sometimes, because the family immediately think, the police suspect us, but that's not the case.
A lot of the neighbours would come and they were searching, and all the family was out. All my nephews, nieces and everybody was searching and everybody was looking. We searched parks and fields, you name it, everywhere. It takes over your mind, your body and everything.
Heather Carroll is the family liaison officer assigned to this case.
When I asked Liz where Wesley had gone, she'd said, well, he'd gone to get some sweets. This was just something that happened all the time. It was nothing strange. But we have to look at the family and friends first, because we don't know what's gone on behind closed doors. We don't know what's gone on in those few hours beforehand. So although I was there to support the family, I'm also there to investigate, to find out. So I spent hours with them, hours and hours, and I got to know them very, very well.
He could have been found unconscious, he could have been in a building, requiring his medication. It was important that the police put sufficient resources into it to find him.
Search teams were brought in immediately, sent to parks, sent to back lanes.
Quite a number of officers involved, helicopter involved, dog handlers, horses.
So as time went on, it became more distressing because he's an 11-year-old little boy.
It was hitting the papers by then, the Ben was missing. And then they're making stories up if he was some kind of urban guerrilla, you know.
At the time, it was reported in the press that he played out and there were no rules and boundaries, and there were rules and boundaries. This was a family who cared about a little boy, but unfortunately things like that in the press don't help. People
had the idea that he was just a kid from the West End in Newcastle that was running wild, and you could have been farther from the truth.
It wasn't fair to judge this little boy from the area he came from. So he played out perhaps to a later time than another child might in another area.
It's not the way he is. He would have come home, he wouldn't have done this. And yet they were convincing everybody that he was just a runaway.
I was annoyed that they could even think that Wesley was being portrayed as a runaway, the artful dodger, because I'm thinking, well, they're not on about my son, they're on about somebody else, but not on about Wesley.
And he wouldn't have stayed away. If he had been all right, he would have been home. He would never have stayed out that way, never.
The more the time went on, the more you don't feel like this is going to have a good ending. My feelings were this just wasn't a little boy who had gone missing, that there was something had happened which was very, very sinister. I am not happy that this is still a missing from home.
It's the morning of the 6th of June 1998. 11-year-old Wesley, who needs epilepsy medication, has been missing all night. His family are frantic with worry and doing everything they can to find him.
We decided to go out with the flyers with Wesley's picture on. So what we were doing was like 3 or 4 doors knocking, please can you put this in, or have you seen this child? And we got nowhere really.
All we could do was pin posters up trying to jog somebody's memory. Has somebody seen this, that and the other? You were just asking questions to anybody, anywhere. You just cannot get that one bit of luck. You cannot get that one little clue. You cannot move forward. You're just stuck in this same place.
Oh, my dad was frantic. He was no sleep. Because he was just running on fumes, I think.
Do you know, if you sat in the house and you were tired, you felt guilty because you were sitting there and you weren't doing anything?
I was told to stay beside the phone because Wesley knew the phone number. If there was any news that anybody had found him, I had to stay at the house.
Day 2 of the missing persons investigation, and there's a discovery.
It was my partner, he answered the door and he shouted, Liz. He went, somebody here, they've got the Ben's bike. I know I didn't walk down the stairs, I must have jumped and got outside and there was a lad. And I went, where'd you get that bike? He says, I've took it off 2 little girls. And by this time, I was screaming in the street, they've got the bike, they've got the bike. I said, where did you get my son's bike? The girls just said they found it in Wingrove. He says, so I've took it off them, and he says, and brought it back to you.
Wingrove Road is a short 15-minute walk from Wesley's home.
Once I found the bike and I thought, well, he's not going to leave it. He wouldn't leave his bike. Something's happened somewhere.
The police make an appeal for anyone who might have spotted Wesley. Scores of people come forward claiming they've seen him.
The family who were coming across has been very anxious. They were going on the television, appealing to the public, which generated more sightings. The police were making appeals to the public. Those sightings were coming in from strangers who thought they'd recognised them. They were coming in from fellow school pupils. So there was upwards of 100 sightings of him. So it seemed that he was in the West End of Newcastle somewhere.
They were getting phone calls inundated that he was down in the park and he was seen everywhere.
So immediately we say to the search team, our uniformed officers, right, get down to the park, get down to this area, get down to the back lane. And the police officers responded immediately.
But I was thinking, I'm going, well, Wesley wouldn't do this to us. He wouldn't stay away for days. To me, the police wasn't listening to the family.
Every piece of information, the police officers cling to it for hope, but it is like an emotional roller coaster. We wanted to find that little boy. We wanted a happy ending. I didn't want to tell the family bad news.
The investigation has been running for 3 weeks, but still no Wesley.
The search teams kept searching, the sightings kept coming in, but something had to change.
DC Trevor Fordy picks up the investigation.
One of the first duties I did when I took over the investigation was to look at these sightings and to establish if these witnesses were positive in their sightings. The witnesses maintained they'd seen Wesley, they knew Wesley, so they're what were referred to as confirmed sightings in those days. As long as that was maintained, the inquiry was going nowhere. It has to be accepted there was a lot of hours and police resources wasted trying to follow up all these sightings of Wesley Neely, and that through the inquiry from day one, basically. From the outset, the bike was the most significant thing as far as I was concerned because of Wesley's attachment to the bike, because from what I understood from the family, he would have never, ever left that bike.
Finally, we've got somebody that's got experience of these kind of things.
It wasn't till Mr. Fordy come in he got a hold of my hand and he went, Liz, he says, I've had a look at it. He says, and I do honestly believe your son has been abducted. And I just looked at Mr. Ford and I burst into tears. I went, so where do we go from here? And it was a matter of, I'd say, 2 days, and everything was boom, straight round.
A number of sightings have been reported by Wesley's school friends. They all need verifying.
One by one, we were able to eliminate those sightings. These children started withdrawing. Other people started withdrawing their sight and said they may have been mistaken. So one by one, the sightings were starting to crumble. We were treating it as an abduction, and therefore it was incumbent on us to try to find him as soon as possible.
You get a little bit of a glimmer of hope. Is it true? He's been abducted. I know he's not in Newcastle because he would have made his way home. He would have put a fight up.
With Wesley's disappearance all over the media and the high-profile police investigation into his presumed abduction, a name is put forward.
The incident room was contacted by a social worker who was aware of an individual that lived in the Wingrove Road area of Newcastle who was forming a friendship with young boys in his area. Within a few days, I had occasion to drive down Wingrove Road and was aware that the individual concerned had a Range Rover motor car. I saw a Range Rover motor car parked in the immediate vicinity and a young lad, quite a distinctive young lad, washing the car. We dug out the house-to-house questionnaires and found the one relative to that young guy. He was called Dominic McKilligan. And not only had his name been put into the system, but he'd actually put a sighting in of Wesley. Now that did have an effect on me, and I was uncomfortable with that.
Further investigation reveals extremely disturbing information about 18-year-old Dominic McKilligan.
We were aware from contact with Dorset Police that he'd been involved in abusing somewhere upwards of 40 children in the Bournemouth area.
4 years earlier, Dominic McKilligan had been convicted of gross indecency against minors. Authorities described him as seriously disturbed, and he was also deemed capable of carrying out fantasies of killing a child.
And decided to bring that guy in for questioning and, if possible, eliminate him from the inquiry.
Dominic McKilligan is interviewed with his solicitor present.
McKilligan was relaxed. He answered all the questions. He said that he knew Wesley from the TV. He hadn't actually met him. And again, for whatever reason, I just wasn't happy with his account.
DC Trevor Fordy simultaneously orders a search of McKilligan's house, but nothing is found.
We therefore had no option but to release him, on bail.
DC Trevor Fordy isn't satisfied with Dominic McKilligan's account.
And I decided to put what's called a police pulsar team or a police search team, uniform officers, to go through that house with a small tooth comb. And then I remember distinctly Inspector Dawson come to me and said an officer had found a torn up bank cheque stuck to the bottom of a bin, and it was addressed to Wesley Neely and signed by McKilligan.
Could this be the breakthrough in the case?
It was necessary to prove that he'd written the name Wesley Neely on the cheque. So initially we got the cheque fingerprinted, but there was nothing positive on that. The next thing was to look at the inks that had signed the name McKilligan and compare it with the name Wesley Neely as the payee. And we quickly got the result back that the inks matched, which meant that McKilligan had to have written the name Wesley Neely on the cheque. We decided to put him under surveillance. The reason being, if Wesley was alive and he was locked away somewhere, or even if he wasn't alive, we might get taken to a body And during the course of that surveillance, he was observed getting some number plates, registration plates made up. He then went to a pharmacist's, he bought razor blades and aspirin. And we had to consider, was he looking to abduct another child? Was he looking to cause Wesley some harm if he was still alive? Or was he looking to take his own life? We couldn't let the surveillance carry on. We had additional evidence, the check, so I made the decision that he was to be arrested again and brought back to Newcastle.
I was given information that McKilligan may be involved in a paedophile ring and that Wesley had been given to this paedophile ring.
When we brought McKilligan in again for re-interview, it was put to him that the inks matched and that he had to be the person that had written that cheque out. That got to him, and we thought there was going to be a breakthrough. And indeed there was a breakthrough, but what he said was, I am responsible for his abduction, but I haven't harmed him. I actually give him to a paedophile group. I was actually shocked.
I remember seeing him thinking, he's just a slight young man. Nothing, no big signs above his head, not dressed inappropriately.
He was a Harry Potter lookalike, and yet he was so confident, so relaxed, so uncaring. And when he told me that, I couldn't believe it. Because here, 3-4 weeks down the road, the indications are Wesley's still alive.
Dominic McKilligan has told police that he's abducted 11-year-old Wesley Neely and given him to a paedophile ring. McKilligan has given the name of someone he says is involved to the police, who follow up on this lead.
We undertook quite a lot of surveillance on this suspect's house in the belief that there was possibly a paedophile group that had Wesley, and the priority was obviously to find him.
DC Trevor Fordy also interviews the suspect to implicate or eliminate from the inquiry.
He admitted that he'd met McKilligan through a newspaper advert and had had a gay relationship with him. But McKilligan had just thrown him into the mix to complicate things, and you could say he was playing with us. It was like a psychological thriller.
DC Trevor Fordy now knows that Dominic McKilligan is playing games with the police. His next move steps things up a level.
His next ploy was to say, OK, I am responsible for his death, but it's not murder. It was an accident. McKilligan told us that he'd been in the house, he'd known Wesley, he'd given him a cheque, which attracted him back to the house. Then one day he had a Mini in a garage behind his house, and he'd heard a noise and gone out, and Wesley was climbing all over his car, was sitting on the car roof, fell off when he was shouted at by McKilligan and hit his head on a wrench that was lying on the floor.
All they could do was interrogate him, and they wanted a confession, and they wanted to find out where the bairn was, because by this time they had found blood on the concrete in the garage and different things, you know, they had been building things up.
It was clear to me that he probably hit him with a wrench, but then he went into some detail that because of his history, because of his past, nobody would believe him, so he decided to put a bin liner over his head and strangle him. He told that many lies before. We had to prove that what he was saying was correct. And the ideal way of that was to try to persuade him to take us to where Wesley was.
He finally admitted, and he took them to where the bairn was.
McKilligan takes the police to a remote, forested area west of Newcastle.
Dominic McKilligan had admitted being responsible for the death of Wesley Neely. And on his direction we came here, and he said to me, if you walk down there to the left, you'll see a bin liner in the undergrowth. And I looked down and I was familiar with what Wesley had been wearing. I could see his legs sticking out of the bin liner and his little shoes, and I knew he was in there. And it was now a confirmed murder inquiry.
I remember it was a Saturday morning, and it was the 4th of July. Knock, knock, knock on the door. Mr. Fordy comes in, I went, "I found Wesley." He says, "That's what I've come to talk to you about." And I just looked at him and I went, "What?" And he got on his knees and he held both my hands. He went, "We found Wesley." And I just looked at him, I went, "And?" He said, "I'm sorry," he's not alive. Oh, and my will just ended there.
It's a most horrible feeling, and it just flashes up to you, am I going to see him again? Oh, it was horrible. But at least we didn't have to search no more. All we want to find out now is what happened and why.
Harry, absolutely, his world had ended. Angry, hurt, upset, and just couldn't believe it.
My dad come out, he went, "Take us to Wesley." And Mr. Ford, he says, "I'm sorry, I can't." He went, "What do you mean you can't?" And both me and my dad were just stood and we were just grief-stricken. "What do you mean you can't take her to him?" He said, "Well, no, it's definitely Wesley," he says, "because he's got his clothes on. Everything you tell Wesley had on," he says, "this child's got on." He says, "So we do definitely believe it's Wesley." By this time I wanted to vomit. The whole of my body was shaking. And all I was kept saying is, "No, I need to go and see him. I need to go and see him. I need to give him cuddles and kisses." I went, "You're telling me my son's not alive?" And he's going, "Liz, no, please." He says, "I don't want you to go through what we've seen."
He'd been there since day one, so it was about a month. That image will live with me forever, basically.
Harry and Liz were desperate to see him, and I absolutely understand that. And I always remember Harry saying, "I just want to look in his eyes. I just want to see his eyes." And I know that haunts them to this day.
DC Trevor Fordy has more news for Liz and Harry.
He says, "We've got the person that killed your son." And I just looked at him, I went, "You've got him? Who is he?" "Dominic McKilligan." McKilligan actually took them to my son's body. And now he was wrapped up in a black bag and put inside a box and just tied in a ditch.
After finding Wesley's body, we had to then look at why he had to die.
The next morning, when I got up, it was Robert's birthday. And he had hundreds of cards, all the police officers and everybody. And Robert just looked at us and he went, "Mum." And I went, "What?" He went, "Where's my Wesley's card?" A lump in my throat. And I had to think quick. And I went, "Well, maybe he forgot to post it." I went, "It is the weekend, you know." I said, "So maybe you may get one tomorrow." Just didn't know what to say to him. Try and celebrate your son's birthday, knowing that your other son isn't coming home. It's not very nice. It's very hard.
Police are determined to make sure the case against Dominic McKilligan is absolutely watertight.
Because of this confession, we then got scientists up from Yorkshire and we recovered quite a lot of forensics, putting Wesley at the house. There was no evidence that he'd been on top of the car. We believe he just raped him and then decided to kill him so that he couldn't complain.
Mr. Ford, he told us, obviously where he lived, roughly 20 minutes walk, if that.
During the course of the inquiry, a social worker arrived out unexpectedly at the police station in Newcastle with this file. Having examined the file, we knew the extent of his offending in Bournemouth. As a consequence of that, contacted Bournemouth police and got even more information.
DC Trevor Fordy then makes a tragic discovery about McKilligan's previous conviction.
Now, what transpired when he was convicted in Bournemouth, he'd missed going on the sex offenders register by 1 day. Had he been on the sex offenders register, the police would have known. Neither Dorset Social Services or Durham Social Services had informed Newcastle Social Services that this guy was in their area.
DC Trevor Fordy believes McKilligan should face charges for both the murder and rape of Wesley Neely.
At that time, the legislation was such that to get on the sex offenders register, a person had to be convicted of a sexual offence. Normally with a murder inquiry, you would charge murder and murder on its own. If there was a rape involved during the course of that murder, that wouldn't be charged. However, the rationale was to charge rape, which is clearly a sexual offence, so that McKilligan would be on the sex offenders register. If he was only charged with murder, he wouldn't be on the register. But there was sufficient evidence after liaising with the Crown Prosecution Service to charge both murder and rape.
The day I buried him was the 28th of August. That was the hardest day of my life, that. Looked at my son's coffin and I went, we'll never say goodbye. And that was the hardest thing I had to ever do.
We didn't view him, we couldn't see him, it was a sealed coffin. And then this Norman Oliver said to Elizabeth, he says, I know you couldn't view the Ben, but he says, look, I picked him up. I carried him to the van when we found him. And he says, I had this suit on. And he says, I've never had it cleaned. And I just kept it and he gave it a cuddle. He says, I'm sorry, that's the closest you're going to get him. Oh, it was things like that. And it was a fact that you couldn't say to him. That was heartbreaking. A mother couldn't say to our son or view him or whatever.
There's a lot of people who think that the police are this, that and the other. They're only human, just like ourselves. I thanked him for that. That's the only closest thing I got to be next to my son again, was to have his smell.
To see that little coffin was just heartbreaking. It's not what you want. This isn't the end result that any police officer wants. And it's absolutely heartbreaking, and it's something I'll never forget.
It's 1 year since Liz Neely was told that Dominic McKilligan killed her 11-year-old son, Wesley. Today, she comes face to face with him.
The first day that I went into magistrates was the first time I actually seen McKilligan. And I stopped breathing.
All the family and I went to the court. And I come up, my sister says to me, she says, Harry, I never ever thought I'd meet the devil in this world. And she says, but I have. I've just seen him. This McKilligan.
It was quite emotional for everyone. There was so much media interest. A court called the Moot Hall in Newcastle, which hadn't been used for years, was reopened, especially for this case.
I went to court every day as a family liaison officer with the family, and they wanted to see the person that was responsible for taking their young son away from them. And I'm sure they were as astounded as everybody else to see this slight young man who was standing there with no emotions showing.
He looked harmless, you know, he just looked like an overgrown school kid sort of thing. There was nothing big or brawny or anything about him. Just a little weasel, and yet he played the game.
He pleaded not guilty, said it was an accident.
Well, he said he had fell off the car or something and banged his head and different things. But they found a wrench with the blood on it.
Obviously the cases sometimes are abbreviated, but the full thrust of how McKilligan had behaved, how he told lies, how he diverted the inquiry, how he'd manipulated the police, all those things came out.
You were hearing all this thing, and it was something that was torn your stomach when you were there, and you were listening to the last minutes of the Ben's life, and then you were looking at him, he just had this smoke on his face sort of thing. And he always gave the impression that he just felt he was smarter than everybody else.
McKilligan gave evidence in his own defence and admitted that he'd taken Wesley and put a bin liner over his head and squeezed his neck. Clearly that was enough to convict. McGilligan showed no remorse whatsoever. I'd never seen anything like that before. He just got the impression he didn't even think he would go to prison.
After a 3-week trial, it takes a jury less than 3 hours to return its verdict.
So I can remember sitting beside my dad, and the judge turned round and asked the jurors about the rape charge, and I come back guilty. About the murder. Life. I went, right, and I just looked at my dad and I says, we've got him.
I was standing behind them, but they had their hands backwards and were holding onto my hands because they needed to hear that this man was guilty.
McGilligan was eventually found guilty of murder and rape.
I remember Harry crying and shouting out that was the result he wanted. It didn't bring their little boy back, but that was the result.
Following McGilligan's conviction at court for murder and rape, he appealed the conviction against rape. And for reasons that might be obvious, i.e. how long Wesley had lain there in the countryside, the evidence in relation to the rape was very weak, and the Court of Appeal decided to quash that conviction.
Missed it by 1 day, sex offenders register, and then for him to overturn my son's rape charge, and he's not going to be on sex offenders register again. That's a no-go area, because he's dangerous, very dangerous person.
A local newspaper approached me and approached Wesley's family and asked if we were interested in getting involved with them with a campaign called Never Again.
It was a campaign to tighten the loopholes in the law.
And that was designed to change legislation whereby if someone was convicted of a murder that was sexually motivated, then they could go on the sex offenders register.
To think he missed it being on the sex offenders list by 1 day, and here he was just in the community picking his way through, look what a victim, and he found Wesley.
All I can think of is my son would want us to fight for other children. I wouldn't be a mother if I didn't think that Wesley stand behind us and he's pushing me all the way. I know for a fact it's not going to bring Wesley back, but if I can save one child, I think my son would want us to do that.
The local community got involved and the greater community of Northumberland and Durham got involved. And there were so many signatures, Parliament couldn't ignore it. And the legislation was subsequently changed.
Dominic McGilligan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. 20 years have now passed, and Wesley's family don't want him to get out.
If they let him out of prison, who's going to put their hands up to say we've got it wrong again?
And when you look back at this fella's criminal history from a kid, he was a right lunatic.
They knew what he was, and I don't want this man out, not to do it again, not to put a family through what we've went through. We don't live, we just exist.
And it's not just the fact that he committed a crime with Wesley and then he's paying for it. He's committed a crime with the whole family. It isn't just the victim. It's everybody around him.
It's hard, because there's still a lot of people who was around when this all happened to Wesley. Keep saying to us, I wonder how he would be as a grown man and if he would have had children or anything. I says, well, that was taken away. I'll never ever come to terms with that. He trusted everybody, and I think that's why he lost his life, because he trusted this person. There's not a day goes by that I don't think about him. Just wish he had a chance to live his life instead of being cut down the way he had.
Wesley's death hasn't just prompted a change in the law.
Wesley's case had such an effect on me, and particularly the sightings. All the sightings intrigued me why people in the circumstances that were presented would come forward and give all this false evidence, basically. But having made some inquiries, I discovered that a similar case, very similar case in Aberdeen. I then discovered another one in Manchester, Greater Manchester, and I liaised with the senior investigating officer on that, and he'd had similar experiences. Sightings all the time. I was then co-opted onto the missing persons working group, a national working group, and we debated this subject at length and decided to call them empathetic sightings. So they're now known as empathetic sightings. So I think the general thrust of an inquiry changed as a result of this and these two other cases, and that you can't always be convinced by sightings.
Another part that the police can learn from this is about the different agencies talking to each other, and perhaps if we'd had knowledge that he'd been released sooner from social workers, from youth offenders, that he was put in this area and that his background was, I don't know, who knows, it's hindsight, but it wouldn't have harmed.
Oh, it's torture. I mean, 20 years later, and I'm still looking for answers. I'm still wanting to find out why. He was just an ordinary kid that went out on his bike, met a monster, and lost his life.